In this video, let's talk about a quote from Lao Tzu, a quote from the book Tao Te Ching. So it's the Taoist scripture, you could say, the main book from Taoism, which is such a confusing and paradoxical book. I mean, I remember many years ago, 10 years ago, trying to read it, and it felt extremely contradicting and paradoxical. The line would begin one way and end a different way, and the way it began and the way it ended made no sense to me. It was completely contradictory. So that was about 10 years ago when I tried to read it. But then a few years later, maybe 2-3 years later, I remember buying it again on Audible, and I was listening to it and it started making sense. Not everything, but a lot of those quotes started making sense. And I was amazed because, they were pointing to a different way to live life, to this fluid and synchronistic and surrendered way of living life. And there's one quote I want to share with you in this video that kind of sums up this Taoist perspective. And the quote is this: "The Tao does nothing, yet nothing remains undone." And for me, this quote perfectly sums up the Taoist concept of wu-wei. So it's action without action, or action without effort. You could almost say action without intention, action without will, action without need. Because you see, all of these withouts are actually reflections of the ego. So on this channel, in these videos, I come from this perspective of trying to differentiate from the mind and the flow. So the mind feels separate and insecure, the mind or ego, you could say, or the egoic mind. And the flow is unified, it includes the mind actually, and it's forced to use it and function through it and undo it. And in a way, you could say that's what the spiritual process of growth is. It's about the flow undoing the mind, or trying to mature it until it surrenders, until it outgrows itself. Because it seems like it's the mind, it seems like it's an egoic mind. It seems like it's a mechanism of development that eventually has to outgrow itself and give way to the Tao. So in these videos, and the perspective that I come from is one of almost differentiating between the mind and the flow, or the Tao. And when you have this difference in your mind, right, in your understanding, you begin to see it everywhere. So in this quote, for example, or the explanation that I was giving right now of wu-wei, so action without need, without intention, without will, without effort, which sounds completely strange and again weird, because from the egoic mind, this seemed to be the way action happens, with will, with effort, with intention, right, with need. But these are actually reflections of the mental paradigm, of the egoic paradigm, where we think we have to make life happen. We feel separate and we feel like we are in charge and we are in control. So the action that comes from that is actually interference in the flow of Tao. So wu-wei, and the beauty of the Taoist teachings is that they are pointing beyond the egoic way of life. They're saying, look, there can be action without those things. There can be, quote unquote, silent action, natural action, effortless action, choiceless action. So that's action that happens by itself. So now to get back to the quote, the Tao does nothing, yet nothing remains undone. That's what it's pointing to. It's pointing to the fact that the Tao does nothing intentionally or as an effort. Yet everything happens, everything takes care of itself. And we are part of that everything, and things take care of themselves, including through our actions It's just that our actions are no longer egoically driven, mentally driven. So they just happen by themselves. So this kind of teachings, they point beyond the egoic mind to the natural way of life. And, of course, when they're saying that Tao does nothing, yet nothing remains undone, the invitation in these texts and in this, poems in the Tao Te Ching book is that we can become like the Tao. We can become the Tao. So we can transcend our egoic ways, our separate ways of life, and synchronize with Tao, and then eventually dissolve into the Tao. And of course, this is actually echoed in Christianity or many other religions. In Christianity, let's say it's the will of God. That's the Tao. And, as Jesus puts it, thy will be done, not mine. But that's for probably another video, but I'm going to kind of expand on that quote as well. But yeah, as you can see, the Tao does nothing, yet nothing remains undone. It's really pointing at the fact that when we're living in this flowing, surrendered way, it doesn't feel like we're doing something. Action is actually almost unintentional, unperceivable. It's like I generally don't feel like I'm doing something right now. I feel like things are happening, things are spoken without it feeling like an action, like an effort. Kind of like with the body, when the body is healthy, you don't feel it. You don't think about it. It's natural to use it. Yet when the body is unhealthy, it begins to feel like pain in different parts, like friction. You start to think about it. So it's the same with action. If you think about action, it's usually going to be coming from the mind. It's going to be contrived. It's going to be a little bit manipulative. It's going to be a little bit strategic. It's going to be using some effort, generally speaking. So the Tao does nothing means that whatever it does, it doesn't feel like it's doing anything. It's so silent. It's so natural. It's so smooth, you could say, and unintentional. And it's actually very enjoyable when life happens that way, because there's no more interference of the mind. There's no more friction and interference. And actually that's when life becomes very synchronistic as well. It always is synchronistic, but now we're not interfering at all. And synchronicity is so obvious. It's everywhere. Just yesterday I was watching a movie and it was so funny because I counted like 4 or 5 mentions just in the first half of the movie, mentions of word by word kind of thoughts I just had in the first part of the day, which were specific kind of things. They weren't like random general things that they would be mentioned, but it was such a beautiful way to see the echo. So this quote of the Tao does nothing, yet nothing remains undone, it really means that nothing remains undone. Life does everything. Life takes care of everything, yet it doesn't, in this mystical way, when the ego is surrendered, it doesn't feel like action. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything. Things are just happening.